Hey guys, tonight we slip back into the Roman Empire, not through marble statues and heroic speeches, but through the back alleys, crowded streets, and smoky kitchens. You can smell the mix of roasting meat, sweat, and horse manure already. Right. Imagine yourself waking up in a small, dim room, the sound of vendors shouting outside and sandals clapping against uneven cobblestones. It's exciting for about 5 minutes. Then reality hits. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far these little bedtime journeys travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle out into the Roman morning with your tunic sticking slightly to your skin, the air already warm, heavy with the smell of baking bread, mixed with the temps of sewage. You pass through the doorway, careful not to trip on the uneven step, because Roman builders didn't exactly think about ergonomics. The streets stretch in every direction, bustling like veins, pumping life into the city. Carts squeak and rattle, pulled by donkeys with ears flicking irritably. Shopkeepers bark prices, street performers twirl, beggars reach out, and somewhere nearby a water seller is yelling louder than everyone else. This is the famous Urbs, the city that rules the world. But a docent feels so glorious when a splash of mystery liquid, let's say it's water, hits your shoulder from an upstairs window. Romans didn't have the same waste disposal ethics you'd hope for. You look up, but the culprit is already gone, and you keep moving, hoping it wasn't chamber pot leftovers. Mainstream history celebrates Rome's roads and aqueducts, and yes, they're remarkable feats of engineering. But those cobblestones you're walking on, they're uneven, slippery when wet, and jammed with carts that technically aren't even allowed during daylight hours. Laws said wagons should stick to night traffic, but enforcement, not exactly reliable. Historians still argue whether these traffic laws were widely enforced or mostly ignored, judging by the chaos around you. You put money on ignored. Your ears are constantly working, the clang of blacksmith hammers, the chatter of gossip, the creak of wooden shop shutters. One quirky fact: Romans loved wind chimes made of bronze or shells, and some families hung little ones outside their homes to ward off evil spirits and, maybe, to annoy their neighbors with constant tinkling. Imagine trying to nap while the city jingles around you. You push into a main forum street and the sensory overload only grows. Smells shift: fresh bread, then sweat, then roasted chickpeas, then something decomposing in a gutter. It's not exactly the Instagrammable vision of ancient Rome, and here comes your first brush with Roman social order. A senator, togas arranged perfectly, strolling past with attendants clearing a path. You're jostled aside without apology. In Rome, status literally moved you to the curb. The funny thing is, for all the empire's grandeur, daily survival here is mostly about dodging accidents and inconveniences. You've already risked waste showers, traffic hazards, and a minor trampling, and it's barely mid-morning. Still, part of you is curious. You can't help but think, how do these people thrive in such chaos? The answer is, they're used to it. You're not. So as you continue down the street, past a row of tightly packed shops, you catch a glimpse of caged birds, cheap sandals, and little clay oil lamps for sale. The city is alive, yes, but it feels like it might swallow you whole. And the day is just getting started. You edge deeper into the streets, and the noise builds like waves crashing against a rocky shore. If you thought you could sneak in a quiet stroll, Rome laughs in your face. The main roads are alive with shouting vendors, wheels grinding against stone, and flocks of goats or pigs shoving their way through. Your sandal slips slightly on a patch of something. You hope it's spilled olive oil and not something less appetizing. Either way, you shuffle forward, hugging your belongings close, because this is no place to relax. Everywhere you look, the city squeezes life into narrow spaces. The streets themselves are only wide enough for a cart to pass through. Yet somehow 3 people, a donkey, and a pushy wine cellar try to share the same path. Imagine rush hour traffic but with animals, baskets of fish, and zero personal space. Romans knew this was a problem. One fact worth noting: Julius Caesar himself banned most wheeled vehicles during daylight hours to ease congestion. But standing here nearly trampled by a mule, you realize law and reality rarely shake hands. Historians still argue whether the ban was consistently applied or simply ignored by anyone important enough to bribe their way out of it. You try breathing through your nose, but that doesn't help. The smells of the Roman street are unforgettable, and not in a good way. On one side, a bakery fills the air with the warm scent of crusty bread. On the other, a tanner's shop slaps you with the reek of animal hides soaking in urine. Because yes, that was part of the process. Toss in a splash of fish guts from a stall, and you've got a perfume that not even the fanciest Roman oils could mask. Here's a quirky tidbit: Romans did sometimes sprinkle powdered saffron in theaters to freshen the air during performances. Out here in the open streets, though, you're on your own. As you jostle forward, the street performer catches your eye. He's balancing on a barrel, tossing knives while singing a bawdy song you don't fully understand. Children laugh, dogs bark, and you nearly collide with a fruit seller swinging a basket of figs like a weapon. This isn't sightseeing, it's survival training. Above you, wooden balconies jut out over the street, their shadows giving you a brief reprieve from the relentless sun. And from one of those balconies splat another splash of mystery liquid lands just a step ahead. You're beginning to see why Romans carried hooded cloaks even in fair weather. The upper floors of apartments doubled as garbage chutes. Imagine going to bed at night knowing tomorrow morning you'll face not just human traffic but falling waste. You keep moving, ears buzzing with countless voices. Everyone is hustling, shouting prices, boasting about wares, or spreading gossip. You hear rumors of a gladiator's victory, whispers about the emperor's mood, and one drunk insisting the aqueduct water tastes like God's tears. The crowd swallows you in, and for a moment you feel what it must be like to live here, always aware, always alert, never quite at ease. One historian described Rome as a place of continuous background drama, and standing here, you can't argue. This is no museum city. It's alive, breathing, and constantly colliding with itself. You wonder how Romans managed to hold conversations in such chaos. Maybe they just shouted louder. So you push on, dodging a cart loaded with amphorae of wine, your ears ringing with the din of the empire's heart. If the glory of Rome lies in its streets, you're beginning to think that's less a compliment and more a warning. You drift toward the market, drawn in by the swell of voices rising like a storm. If you thought the streets were chaotic, the market is a whole new level of sensory overload. Imagine a farmer's market crossed with a mosh pit, but replace the music with merchants hollering at the top of their lungs. A man with pomegranates thrusts one into your hand before you can refuse. Fresh from Hispania, he shouts, though you can't help but notice the fruit looks a little tired. The smells come in waves. Roasted chickpeas pop and hiss on a hot pan. Fish laid out on slabs of stone waft their briny perfume. And over there, someone's grilling sausages spiced with peppercorns imported all the way from India. That's right, the Roman Empire was a global supermarket before supermarkets existed. And yet, tucked between all this bounty, you see cuts of meat crawling with flies, bread that looks like it's gone on strike, and barrels of olives that might be closer to sludge than snack. You hesitate, stomach growling, but choice here is tricky. Eat nothing and starve. Or eat something and risk discovering how bad Roman food poisoning can get. Mainstream history loves to point out how Romans expanded trade routes, bringing goods from Britain, Egypt, even China via the Silk Road. It's impressive, sure. But when you're re-staring at a stall where yesterday's fish share space with today's questionable cheese, you start wondering how much that mattered to the average shopper. Historians still argue whether most Romans truly had access to exotic luxuries, or if only the wealthy dined on pepper and cinnamon, while everyone else got barley porridge with a side of envy. There is a quirky fact buried in the noise. Some Roman cooks actually used fermented fish sauce called garum in almost everything. Think ketchup, but smellier. People swore by it, and even Pliny the Elder described its varieties as if he were reviewing fine wines. You sniff the air and yep, that tangy punch in your nose is definitely garum. You inch through the crush of bodies, vendors waving knives to cut samples, others beckoning you with clay cups of cheap wine. Children dart around your legs, chasing each other with sticky figs. A beggar tugs at your sleeve, mumbling for coins, while a merchant nearby claims his dates can cure headaches, stomach aches, and possibly heartbreak. You almost laugh. Snake oil salesmen existed long before the internet. And then there's the haggling. Prices aren't fixed. They're a test of endurance. You point at a loaf of bread, and the seller names a sum that could probably buy you half a chicken. You frown. He frowns back, and the battle begins. Voices rise, hands wave, and after a sweaty exchange, you shave off a fraction of the price. Victory feels sweet, but the bread itself, hard enough to double as a weapon. Above the market stalls, temple columns loom, silent witnesses to this daily ritual of trade. The gods may watch, but they don't intervene when a goat makes a daring escape, scattering baskets of figs like marbles across the pavement. Laughter erupts, curses follow, and the crowd surges again. You clutch your loaf, trying not to trip, realizing that even buying lunch in Rome feels like an extreme sport. And as you chew the bread, dusty, chewy, stubborn, you remind yourself this is only midday. Your Roman adventure has plenty of ways left to test you. You duck away from the roar of the market and weave into the residential quarters, where the streets narrow into shadows. The air cools slightly, but don't let that fool you. What lies here is less peaceful retreat and more vertical trap. You've just stepped into the world of the insulate, those tall, cramped apartment blocks that house the bulk of Rome's population. They rise 4, 5, even 6 stories high, leaning like tired soldiers, their wooden balconies jutting into the air. You glance upward and wonder how on earth do these stay standing. Spoiler, they often didn't. Your first steps inside confirm it. The stairwell creaks underfoot, and the walls smell faintly of smoke and damp plaster. A neighbor squeezes past, balancing a clay jug of water, muttering something about the aqueduct pipes failing again. Welcome home, or at least, welcome to the place you'll collapse when the city has wrung you dry. Mainstream history praises Roman engineering, aqueducts, bridges, temples, but the insulae were another matter entirely, built cheaply and quickly. They were the empire's answer to urban sprawl. Thousands of Romans lived stacked like sardines, while senators and the wealthy lounged in sprawling villas elsewhere. Historians still argue whether some landlords truly invested in safer designs or if most preferred to rake in rent until their fire-prone wooden towers collapsed. Judging from the leaning beams overhead, you're leaning toward the latter. Here's a quirky tidbit. The higher you lived, the cheaper your rent. Sounds nice, until you realize that meant climbing 6 flights of shaky wooden stairs daily while hauling water, food, and maybe a screaming toddler. And if a fire broke out, congratulations, you now live in a chimney. Fires were so common that Emperor Augustus set up the vigils, an early firefighting force, but you doubt they'd reach you before the building went up like a torch. You shuffle into a one-room unit, low ceiling, cracked plaster, a single window that barely opens. The bed is a straw mat. The table, a wobbly plank balanced on bricks. A family of 4 might call this spacious. The sound of neighbors arguing bleeds through thin walls. And from above comes the unmistakable thud of someone stomping around. Privacy, forget it. Even sleep is no guarantee. The creak of the stairs, the drip of water from the roof, the occasional rat skittering across the floor keep you on edge. You light a small oil lamp, its smoky flame painting shadows across the room. The scent of cooking seeps in from the corridor, beans stewing in a clay pot, maybe cabbage boiled until it becomes a weapon of smell. Someone sneezes nearby and you wonder how quickly illness spreads in such tight quarters. Spoiler again, very quickly, and yet Romans made do. Children laughed in courtyards, women traded gossip while pounding grain, and men played dice by lamplight. Life didn't stop because conditions were tough, it just adapted. You, however, feel the walls closing in between the fire risk, the unstable construction, and the claustrophobic air. You start thinking that maybe sleeping outside with the stray dogs wouldn't be so bad. But the day isn't done. Outside, voices rise again, pulling you back into the flow of Roman life. You step out of the insulate, heart pounding a little faster, realizing that in this empire, even your home is a gamble. You shuffle back into the daylight and follow the sound of splashing water, drawn toward one of Rome's most iconic institutions, the public baths. Forget the idea of a quiet spa retreat. This is more like a social convention center where half the city gathers. Columns rise around the entrance, mosaics glint underfoot, and the humid air carries a heady blend of steam, oil, and, well, too many unwashed bodies in one place. You pay a small entry fee and, unless you are lucky enough to be sponsored by a generous patron, and step inside. The first thing that hits you isn't the heat, but the chatter. The baths are as much about conversation as they are about cleansing. Senators lean against marble benches debating politics. Tradesmen cut deals over olive oil, and teenagers giggle in clusters, tossing water at each other. If you were hoping for a peaceful soak, forget ITV just walked into the city's loudest living room. Mainstream history reminds us that the baths were architectural marvels, fed by aqueducts and heated by hypercost systems, ingenious floors warmed with circulating hot air. Impressive, yes, but standing here, your mind drifts to hygiene, with hundreds, sometimes thousands, of Romans sharing the same pools. Let's just say the water quality wasn't exactly crystal clear. Historians still argue whether the baths spread disease, or if the hot temperatures kept things mostly safe. Judging by the sheen of oil floating on the surface, you wouldn't bet on safety. Here's a quirky tidbit. After bathing, Romans scraped sweat and dirt from their skin with curved metal tools called strigils. Picture everyone lining up to oil themselves, then scraping off the grime. Some bath attendants even collected the oily scrapings, which could be sold for medicinal purposes. Yes, you heard right, people reused other people's sweat in oil. Suddenly, that hot tub back home seems a lot more appealing. You wander through the sequence, the tepidarium warm room, the caldarium hot room, and finally the frigidarium cold plunge. The steam fogs your vision, your skin prickles, and the chatter echoes endlessly. Someone tries to strike up a conversation about the latest gladiator match, another boasts about his son's education, and you realize the baths double as Rome's social media. Gossip spreads faster here than wildfire through a dry insula. And privacy? None. Men and women usually bathe separately, though not always, depending on the era and the emperor's whims. You catch yourself glancing nervously at strangers sharing your pool, thinking about all the microbes doing the backstroke. It's communal, it's bonding, it's kind of gross. You towel off with a scrap of cloth if you remember to bring one, and step back into the open air. Your skin tingles from the heat, your ears buzz with leftover chatter, and your stomach clenches with hunger. You're cleanish, refreshish, but also slightly unnerved by how close you just got to the rest of the city. As you walk away from the baths, you realize in Rome, even self-care is a crowded performance. You can't escape the empire's gaze. Not in the streets, not in your insula, and definitely not in the baths. You step back into the streets, your skin still damp from the baths. And almost immediately the city reminds you of another unavoidable reality: sanitation, or the very Roman version of it. At first glance, you might think Rome had it all figured out. After all, this is the empire famous for aqueducts and sewers. The Cloaca Maxima, the Great Drain, was one of the engineering marvels of the ancient world, channeling waste out of the city. But walk a few steps and you realize the truth. Clean water and dirty streets lived side by side, sometimes literally flowing past each other. You pass a line of public fountains where citizens fill their clay jugs. The water sparkles, clear and cool, drawn from distant springs. Children splash their hands in it, women rinse vegetables, and you can't help but admire the system. But take 2 more steps, and a stream of something foul runs down the gutter beside you. That's Rome in a nutshell. Genius infrastructure paired with day-to-day mess. You turn a corner and find yourself at a public latrine. Rows of stone seats stretch side by side, no dividers, no privacy. Just a communal bathroom where conversations continue without pause. You perch on one of the benches, staring at the constant stream of water flowing beneath the wash waste away. Impressive, yes, but then you notice the communal sponge in a stick that is dipped into a bucket of salty water. It's shared by everyone. You shift uncomfortably, suddenly grateful for modern toilet paper. Historians still argue whether people brought their own sponges to avoid sharing, or whether hygiene standards were just that relaxed. Either way, the idea makes you clench involuntarily. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Romans actually used powdered mouse brains as toothpaste. Imagine brushing with that before heading into the communal latrine for a chat about politics. Dental hygiene was creative. You step outside again, nose wrinkling at the mingling scents, roasting meat from a tavern, incense burning at a shrine, and the unmistakable temps of raw sewage. It's not that Romans didn't care about cleanliness, they just lived in such dense numbers that the system couldn't keep up. People dumped chamber pots out of windows, animals left droppings everywhere, and gutters carried the city's waste downhill, often straight past shops and homes. You watch a child kick a ball near a puddle of runoff, laughing as though the smell doesn't exist. Maybe to them it doesn't, they've grown up in it. To you, though, the mixture of wonder and nausea is overwhelming. You start to understand why Roman perfumes and scented oils were so popular. Sometimes survival meant distracting your nose with something stronger. And as you move away, sandals splashing through another questionable puddle, you realize that for all the empire's glory, Rome was never the pristine marble fantasy you picture in your head. It was alive, messy, ingenious, and unsanitary, all at once. By now, your stomach twists with hunger, so you duck into a quieter street in search of a doctor, or more realistically, someone pretending to be one. Because in Rome, medicine is less about science as you know it, and more about a cocktail of tradition, superstition, and a pinch of guesswork. You find a stall draped with herbs, jars, and odd-looking instruments. The man behind it claims to be trained in the teachings of Galen, the empire's superstar physician. He speaks confidently about balancing your 4 humus: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, as if your body is a leaky soup pot got a fever. Clearly you have too much blood. His solution: bloodletting. He brandishes a blade with unnerving eagerness, and you quickly decline, clutching your arm protectively. Mainstream history often celebrates Galen's influence, noting how his writings shaped medical thought for over 1,000 years. But standing here, with a man about to poke you with a rusty scalpel, you see the darker side. Treatments often did more harm than good. Historians still argue whether Galen's theories helped stabilize medical practice or trapped Europe in a cycle of misguided remedies long after Rome had fallen. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Romans swore by wearing amulets filled with herbs or animal parts to ward off illness. One charm supposedly used powdered dog dung. Imagine carrying that around your neck and calling it medicine. You try not to laugh or gag. The doctor offers a potion made from honey, vinegar, and garlic, claiming it cures everything from headaches to bad luck. You sip cautiously and nearly choke. It burns worse than cheap wine, but he beams proudly, declaring you healed. Around you, others line up with broken bones, coughs, or mysterious rashes, all hoping for relief. Some leave clutching herbal poultices, others with new bandages, and one poor soul, pale and dizzy, after a generous bleeding. And then there are the traveling healers quacks who sell miracle cures from carts. You pass one shouting about a potion that prevents plague and improves your love life. The crowd laughs, but some still buy. Fear makes easy customers. You can't help but think, maybe the baths, with all their hot steam, were as close to real therapy as most people got. Sure, they spread germs, but at least they felt good. Here, medicine feels more like rolling dice. As you leave the store, your stomach growls again, louder this time. Food poisoning from the market, infection from the streets, or a dose of mystery medicine starting to sink in. In Rome, health is never guaranteed, and survival often means simply avoiding the doctor's help. As your slightly queasy stomach settles, you turn down a side street and encounter Rome's other constant: law and order. The chaos, pretending to be a magistrate, sits on a raised chair, quill in hand, as citizens gather to hear proclamations, complaints, and occasional accusations. You quickly realize that justice here isn't a slow, fair process. One misstep, a word out of place, a coin unpaid, a neighbor's grudge can land you in hot water, literally or figuratively. You watch as a man is accused of stealing chickens. The accuser waves his arms, shouts, and slaps down a clay jug as evidence. The defendant protests, voice rising, but the magistrate barely glances before issuing a sentence. A fine and public humiliation. Your eyebrows rise. How did he decide so quickly? Romans valued efficiency over deliberation, and sometimes that efficiency feels brutal. Historians still argue whether these swift judgments were effective deterrents or just a convenient way to keep the plebs intimidated. Here's a quirky tidbit. Minor punishments could include being forced to wear a sign declaring your crime while walking through the forum. Imagine strolling past the city's bustling streets wearing a sandwich board that screams, "I stole a chicken." Social humiliation was the original viral content. You trudge along, mindful of your every step, because petty officials lurk everywhere. A minor disagreement over street space could escalate if someone decides to bribe a scribe or call in a clerk. Bribes were routine, woven into daily life, from taxes to marketplace disputes. The phrase, "it's cheaper to pay than argue," takes on literal meaning in Rome. And punishments, they vary wildly. Fines, public whippings, confiscation of goods, even temporary imprisonment in a dank cell. You glimpse one unfortunate soul sitting behind iron bars, eyes wide as a rat scurries past. The irony is not lost that you re standing mere meters from some of the empire's most impressive architecture. Yet survival depends on navigating petty bureaucracy as much as dodging lions in the Colosseum. The street itself is a maze of risk. A cart may clip your shoulder, a neighbor may accuse you of trespassing, or a vendor may demand extra coin for a loaf of bread. Every interaction is a delicate negotiation. Mistakes, misjudgments, or even bad timing can have serious consequences. As the sun climbs, you realize something. In Rome, law isn't abstract or distant, it's a constant, pressing weight on your shoulders. Awareness, caution, and sometimes luck determine whether you leave a street unscathed. One wrong move, and you could be caught in a legal snare before you even finish your walk. By now, the weight of Rome's streets, markets, baths, and laws presses on you, and you start noticing another constant. The role of social hierarchy in labor. Everywhere you look, relationships are defined by who owes whom, who works for whom, and who simply doesn't care because they're above it all. You brush past a group of slaves hauling water, their muscles straining under clay jars, sweat running in rivulets. You're not a slave yet, but the sight reminds you that much of Rome runs on unpaid, coerced labor. The streets themselves feel alive with these power dynamics. Patrons wave to clients for favors, citizens bow slightly to officials, and merchants nod cautiously to influential neighbors. Even a casual stroll can be a subtle negotiation of status. One wrong glance, a missed greeting, or a delayed response can earn you a scowl or worse, a public rebuke. Historians still argue whether patronage systems strengthened community bonds or merely reinforced inequality at every level. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Roman slaves could earn or buy their freedom through tips or small trades. There are records of a few becoming shopkeepers, artisans, or even gladiators who gained fame and wealth. So technically survival wasn't hopeless, but the odds were stacked like bricks in an insular wall. You pause near a construction site. Laborers carry stone blocks, overseers bark orders, and the occasional lucky citizen haggles for a small piece of profit from a contract. Slavery underpins everything: wealth, leisure, even the grain that will feed the city later. You watch a young boy, probably not older than 10, carry a basket far heavier than his frame suggests, and you flinch. Rome's success has a very human cost. Social pressure isn't confined to labor either. Weddings, festivals, and even casual meals involve careful navigation of expectations. Miss a greeting, forget a gift, or fail to respect a neighbor's claim to street space, and you'll feel the social whip as sharply as any official decree. Every interaction is layered with expectation, obligation, and hierarchy. And surviving the day depends on reading these cues quickly. As you trudge along, trying not to trip over a stray dog or a discarded amphora, you begin to feel the subtle tension of Roman life. The empire is magnificent, yes, but it's also a living network of debts, favors, and chains, both literal and figurative. Even if you were well-fed, well-armed, and well-informed, navigating these social currents alone would be exhausting. And in the back of your mind, a small voice whispers, "This is only midday." If the streets, baths, markets, and insulae haven't already worn you down, the next hours promise even more trials. By late afternoon, you notice a shift in the city's rhythm. The chatter of merchants and clatter of carts give way to a more mysterious, almost ritualistic undertone. Religion surrounds everything in Rome, not just in temples or shrines, but in the way people move, speak, and breathe. Household gods, or lares and pinates, watch over kitchens and doorways, You notice tiny statues perched on ledges, bowls of offerings tucked into corners, and incense curling skyward from open windows. Romans believed that ignoring these spirits could bring misfortune or worse, a curse. Stepping carefully past a small shrine, you witness an augur, a priest reading the flight of birds. Whispering to a crowd that is gathered, they murmur in approval or concern, reacting to the signs like weather reports. Superstition is woven into daily life. If a raven croaks thrice at the wrong hour, business may be postponed, a marriage delayed, or a military march reconsidered. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely feared or mostly performed for social cohesion. But standing here, you can sense the anxiety beneath every bow and offering. Here, as a quirky tidbit, some Romans carried tiny phallic charms to protect against the evil eye. Imagine walking around with an ancient lucky charm dangling from your belt, hoping nobody notices you fiddling with it in public. The symbolism is memorable. Emperor worship is another layer. Statues loom in the forum, coins bear the emperor's face, and citizens offer gestures of respect during processions. Even minor infractions against these rituals could draw attention from officials. You duck slightly, pretending to examine a fountain, hoping your casual nonchalance won't count as disrespect. As you continue, small domestic shrines remind you that Romans believed fate could be negotiated. A properly timed offering, a whispered prayer, a correctly interpreted omen, these could tip the balance between prosperity and disaster. In the streets, children mimic prayers, merchants murmur blessings over wares, and soldiers pause to salute the gods before drilling. And yet, there is humor hidden in these practices. One merchant waves incense over his produce while slipping a coin into his pocket, divine blessing and personal gain. Conveniently combined, religion shapes behavior, spreads anxiety, and entertains all at once. You pause under a columned arch, inhaling the scent of incense mixed with the street's usual chaos, realizing that in Rome, life is always under divine scrutiny. Even if you dodge human danger, ignoring the gods is another form of risk entirely. Survival, it seems, requires navigating both mortal and supernatural rules simultaneously. Night begins to fall, but the city doesn't sleep. In fact, the evenings bring their own rhythm, a mixture of vibrant energy and hidden danger. You hear the clang of tavern doors closing, the chatter of late-night vendors, and the occasional shout of someone trying to catch a runaway cart. In Rome, darkness doesn't guarantee calm, it simply changes the kind of chaos you encounter. You stroll past a night market, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts, smoky lamps, and a hint of vinegar from pickled vegetables. Street performers entertain crowds under flickering oil lamps. Acrobats flip and balance while spectators cheer, and you can't help but notice the subtle tension between fun and lawlessness. Pickpockets thrive here, working the shadows while the city's energy masks their movements. Historians still argue whether urban crime in Rome was unusually high or merely exaggerated by chroniclers. But standing here, every rustle behind your back feels like a test of vigilance. Here, as a quirky tidbit, some thieves use trained monkeys to snatch coins from market-goers' pockets. Imagine a small monkey disappearing with your dinner money before you even notice. You check your satchel nervously and give it a reassuring pat. As you navigate the narrow alleys, you notice that night also transforms social interactions. Patrons leaving taverns argue over debts, friends swap news, and strangers whisper rumors. Your ears strain to distinguish harmless gossip from warnings of trouble. Somewhere nearby, the shrill laughter of a drunk man echoes, and you instinctively step aside. Even the smallest misstep, a poorly timed glance or a wrong word, can attract unwanted attention after dark. The lighting is another hazard. Torches and oil lamps cast flickering shadows that can hide both allies and adversaries. A stray dog darts out, and you jump, realizing that even a simple collision could trigger a fight. And yet, amidst this unpredictability, life pulses vibrantly. Night markets are places of both risk and opportunity. Food, entertainment, and social connection thrive under the moon, even as danger lurks. You pass a group of young men haggling over stolen goods, their voices low but intense. The city's hierarchy doesn't vanish at night. It shifts into subtler forms. Awareness and quick reflexes are as crucial now as they were in the daylight chaos of streets and markets. Walking on, you notice the rhythm of the city, the blending of danger, commerce, and social performance, and realize that sleep here must be light and alert. You wonder, if you survive the day, can you survive the night? In Rome, the answer is never guaranteed. As night deepens, you're drawn toward the outskirts, where the city's energy mixes with whispers of crime and shadows of the poor. Here, the alleys are narrower, and the lamplight flickers across uneven cobblestones, revealing puddles and discarded refuse. You tread carefully, knowing that in these quarters, survival depends on quick wits and sharper instincts. One wrong step, one careless glance, and you could attract the attention of thieves or worse gangs that patrol these streets. You notice a group huddled around a small fire, cooking scraps. They nod at you cautiously, sizing you up. Hunger is a universal language in Rome, and you realize that some citizens live on the edge daily, scavenging what they can. Mainstream history often glamorizes the grandeur of Rome's architecture, politics, and military, but survival for the poor was brutal. Historians still argue whether urban poverty fueled rebellion and unrest or merely kept the underclass compliant. But standing here, it's easy to see why tensions simmer just beneath the surface. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some street dwellers collected urine from public latrines because it contained ammonia, which they used to bleach and clean clothing. Imagine going through your daily chores with a jug of human pee in hand, necessary, yet undeniably odd. You wrinkle your nose but continue along, stepping lightly over scattered debris. You pass a tavern, the smell of cheap wine and stale bread spilling into the street. Patrons stagger in and out, arguing over games of dice, debts, and gossip. Violence isn't uncommon here. A thrown mug can escalate into a brawl, and guards often arrive too late to prevent it. You keep your distance, pretending to inspect a wall while keeping one eye on potential troublemakers. Even the architecture seems to conspire with danger. Dilapidated insulae loom overhead, fire hazards obvious, and weak staircases creak ominously underfoot. Animals wander freely: dogs, pigs, chickens, and you dodge more than one with a near stumble. Survival in these parts isn't just about avoiding thieves, it's about navigating a city teeming with living obstacles, both human and animal. Despite the hazards, some warmth and humor persist. Children dart through alleys with improvised toys. Neighbors exchange friendly banter despite scarce resources, and small fires offer both light and comfort. It's a fragile balance of life and risk, and you realize, if you made it this far, your senses have become hyper. Your reflexes sharpened, and your understanding of Roman street life has deepened in ways that no textbook could convey. The night air carries a different scent as you move closer to the Tiber River. Here, the city slows, but not entirely. The riverbanks hum with activity. Fishermen repairing nets, merchants unloading small boats, and occasional travelers hurrying along the quays. The water glimmers under torchlight, reflecting shadows of bridges that arch across the river. It's quieter than the market streets, yes, but danger still lingers in subtle forms. You notice that flooding is a constant worry. The Tiber swells unpredictably, and during heavy rains, low-lying streets can become miniature rivers. Romans attempted to manage the problem with embankments and drainage, but the city's geography made flooding inevitable. Historians still argue whether these engineering efforts truly reduced disasters or just delayed them. Either way, you step cautiously on the uneven stones, aware that one slip could send you tumbling into cold, murky water. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Romans believe that tossing coins into the river could appease river spirits and ensure safe passage. You see a few locals perform the ritual, muttering under their breath before continuing on. You hesitate to join, thinking a coin in your pocket might also vanish into the current if tossed incorrectly. Superstition and practicality dance together along the riverbanks. The river is also a hub for commerce. Small skiffs carry barrels of olive oil, wine, and fish, while larger ships wait to transport goods to and from distant provinces. You watch a fisherman pull in a wriggling catch, the fish glinting in torchlight, and feel a pang of hunger. Safe food is always a concern. Even the freshest catch could spoil quickly in Rome's heat. You remind yourself to resist the temptation to grab anything unverified. Your stomach has already suffered enough today. Nightlife along the Tiber isn't all danger and work. You catch the faint sound of music, a flute perhaps, or a lyre from a small gathering nearby. A family shares bread, and laughter bubbles softly, a rare respite from the constant city tension. Moments like this make you realize that even amidst chaos, Romans carved out pockets of humanity and joy. You pause on a bridge, watching the water ripple below, reflecting torchlight like molten gold. The city seems both enormous and intimate from here. You can trace the distant glow of other quarters, hear faint shouts and laughter, and feel the pulse of Rome at night. It's a delicate balance. Beauty and peril coexist. A constant reminder that survival requires attention, adaptability, and a little luck. By now, your limbs ache from hours of walking, dodging carts, puddles, and human and animal traffic. But as the night deepens, a new layer of Roman life emerges. Entertainment and spectacle. You wander toward the amphitheater district, where torchlight glimmers off the stone facades of arenas. Even at night, the city celebrates, and you're reminded that spectacle is as central to Roman identity as food, labor, or law. The crowds are smaller than daytime, but the energy is intense. Gladiators practice their routines under dim light, their metal clanking, muscles straining, and instructors barking orders. You watch fascinated, as a young fighter parries and strikes, the rhythmic movements almost hypnotic. Mainstream history immortalizes gladiators as symbols of Rome's martial spirit, yet everyday life for them is grueling, dangerous, and often short-lived. Historians still argue whether gladiators were celebrated heroes or tragic pawns in a society obsessed with violence and spectacle. Here's a quirky tidbit: some gladiators were actually vegetarians, eating primarily barley and beans to maintain a specific physique. You squint at the display of food offered nearby, imagining the irony of a gladiator rejecting meat while you wrestle with your market-bought loaf. You drift toward a nearby theater, where actors rehearse comedies and tragedies alike. The stage is modest but alive with energy, and the audience, friends, neighbors, and curious passers-by reacts enthusiastically. In Rome, theater is more than entertainment. It's social commentary, a mirror reflecting the quirks, follies, and politics of the day. You hear a clever jab at a senator, a pun on a local scandal, and can't help but smile. Even here, in the shadow of danger, humans find a way to laugh. Outside, street performers take advantage of dwindling crowds. Acrobats flip from barrels, musicians play flutes and lyres, and you see a mime acting out exaggerated versions of city life: the slow march of slaves, the frantic haggling of vendors, the chaotic scramble for water. Laughter mingles with torchlight and the scent of roasted nuts, offering a brief respite from the constant tension. Yet, amidst this energy, you remain acutely aware of the dangers that lurk even in celebration. Pickpockets, ruffians, and accidents are never far away. Survival in Rome requires you to enjoy these moments while keeping one hand on your belongings and another on your wits. And as you watch the shadows play across the arena walls, you understand that the city's pulse never truly sleeps, it simply shifts its tempo. From the clamor of day to the secretive thrill of night, the city grows quieter now, though the hum of Rome never fully disappears. You find yourself wandering through the dimly lit streets, torchlight flickering across mosaics walls, and cobblestones slick from evening dew. Your feet ache, your stomach rumbles, and every sense feels sharpened from a day spent navigating the empire's relentless pace. You glance at the insulae, the taverns, the river, and the market stalls, each one still holding echoes of life, conflict, and survival. As you pass a fountain, you see a few late-night travelers drinking and murmuring quietly. The city seems almost serene, yet your mind reminds you that danger never fully sleeps. Wild animals wander the alleys, thieves prowl for opportunity, and illness lingers in corners you can't see. You breathe deeply, letting the cool night air soothe your frayed nerves, though your senses remain alert. Even in relative calm, Rome demands awareness. Historians still argue whether this constant tension was the price of urban sophistication, or simply the unavoidable chaos of densely packed life. Here, as a quirky tidbit, some Romans believed that sleeping with a small coin under your pillow could ward off nightmares or attract good fortune. You consider slipping a coin from your satchel beneath the corner of your straw mat in one of the insulates. You ever made it back that far tonight? You round a quiet corner and catch the faint echo of a street musician's lyre, the notes drifting over empty alleys. The sound seems to pull the city into a slower rhythm, letting you feel, just for a moment, that you might actually endure another day. You pause near a small shrine, murmuring a half-hearted prayer to the Lares and Pinates for protection. Survival has been a blend of alertness, caution, and luck, and tonight it feels like fortune has smiled. The night deepens further. You notice the subtle interplay of light and shadow across the Tiber, the faint sound of distant voices, and the occasional clatter of a stray animal. You realize that Rome's heartbeat is steady, complex, and unforgiving, but also oddly comforting once you've learned to read its rhythm. Every alley, street, and plaza tells the story of human resilience, ingenuity, and folly. You trudge slowly back toward your insula, reflecting on the day's lessons. Resourcefulness matters. Humor can be a shield, and even in the face of chaos, brief pockets of beauty exist if you pause to notice. Tonight, you survived. Maybe not unscathed, but you survived. And as your eyes grow heavy, you know that tomorrow will bring the same tests in new forms. The empire never rests, and neither can you if you hope to last another day.